Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Welcome to Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein, and I am here with my friend, colleague, and co-host, Dr. Phil Nelson, to join you today in a conversation.
And how you doing, Peter?
I'm doing great, Phil. I'm enjoying some of this cold, damp weather we're having in Southern California. I'd like to say I'm enjoying it, but I'm not. But I'm really happy that we're able to connect again. And I also want to thank Nationwide for their ongoing support of our insanity, of our podcast, and of our discussions on issues impacting the world and impacting the veterinary profession. And I am really excited about today's conversation, not because you're on it, Phil, but because we have a guest who I have known for a number of years. We have passed multiple times in different hallways and different congresses and everything else, but have rarely had much of a time to speak. So I'm really excited about today's guest, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Phil Nelson to do an introduction, and then we'll get started with our guest and his cat.
I'm Phil Nelson, and it's a pleasure to be here today and introduce a longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Andrew Maccabe, Director of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges. Dr. Maccabe, welcome.
Thank you, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to be joined by my trusty sidekick, Oscar the Wonder Cat. He is attuned to whenever the Zoom camera starts. That's his cue to come up here and get in my way. So he's glad to join as well.
Well, too bad this isn't a virtual podcast, because frankly, I'm interested in interviewing Oscar now. Dr. McCabe, why don't we get started by first introducing you to us? Why don't you tell us something about your adventure into the veterinary profession?
Oh my! So beginning with ancient history, the beginning of time.
Yeah, right after the wheel was introduced.
So I'm a 1985 graduate of The Ohio State University. It happened to be the centennial year of the college, and so I refer to it as the world famous centennial class of 1985. But my interest was in dairy production medicine, so I began my career in Northeast Ohio, Ashtabula County, in a primarily dairy herd health practice. So back in those days, typical average herd size in Ohio was about 50 cows. So it was a lot of small family farms, mixed animal practice, and I really enjoyed it. Put about 50,000 miles a year driving around the county. But you develop a special relationship with farm families when you're on the farm several times a month. And it suited me well, including, dystocias at 2 a.m. in February. A few of those is enough, but it was good. And then there was a big shakeup in the dairy industry, and there was a consolidation that occurred. Federal buyout programs allowed small farmers to depopulate and go into other businesses, and our practice shifted to more and more companion animal work. And that's fine, it just wasn't my interest. So I was looking for something else. And at the advice of a classmate, I talked to a recruiter for the United States Air Force. And first experience of my life of being professionally recruited, within 6 weeks, I had a commission as a public health officer in the Air Force. And I was kind of surprised at what a good fit that was for me. I anticipated trying it out for about 3 years. I can do anything for that period of time, but it turned into nearly a lifetime career. So I did 10 years on active duty, serving in many installations around the world. And then subsequent to that, another 15 in the reserve, which was a great way to finish my career. And I retired as a colonel about 5 years ago. So after I left the Air Force, and by the way, they were kind enough to send me to get my Master of Public Health degree while I was on active duty. So I did that. But I kind of had a midlife crisis and decided to ride my bicycle around the country and ended up going to law school. Never been before. So what the heck? Anyhow, I ended up doing that. And as I was getting ready to leave law school, I noticed a notice in the Journal of the AAVMA that a former professor of mine had just been named the executive director of this AAVMC association, whatever the heck that was. He'd been a mentor of mine throughout my career. I sent him my resume and said, if you know anybody in the Washington, D.C. area who's looking for a veterinarian with a public health and law background, feel free to share my resume. And he called me back and he said, well, I want to hire you. And I said, well, what the heck do you do there? So I came to visit and ended up working with, that was Larry Hyder. Ended up working with him for about 5 years as a deputy director at AAVMC. And then Dr. Lonnie King, formerly the dean at Michigan State University, had recently been appointed the director of CDC's infectious disease branch. And he invited me to join him there at CDC. So I did that for about 5 years and served as the liaison between CDC and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. An interesting career. I talk about, it was two different agencies divided by a common mission. Both of them were public health agencies, but they approached the public health mission from very different perspectives, and coordinating and collaborating those two efforts was a lot of what I did. And at the end of those 5 years, the position of Chief Executive Officer at the AAVMC opened up. I applied and was selected, and I've been in this role now for about just a little over 10 years.
So for the sake of the audience, I should say that during Dr. McCabe's tenure, he's become one of the profession's leading thought leaders in a number of issues, and probably a thorn in a few people's side, as is Dr. Weinstein, in promoting change and promoting adaptation to problems that we identify through forward thinking. And I just want to take this moment right now, Dr. McCabe, to thank you for your service and to thank you for broadening the role of the executive director of AAVMC. So having been a past president of AAVMC, I know Dr. McCabe would never say this, but part of his role is to tell the presidents what to do. Dr. McCabe, why don't you tell us the purpose for the AAVMC?
The American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges has always represented all of the veterinary medical schools in the United States and Canada. And that arose from the fact that they're all accredited by the same common accrediting system, the Council on Education, which is jointly supported by the AVMA and the AAVMC. We appoint half the members to the council, they appoint half the members. We provide half the funding for the COE and they provide half the funding for the COE. But the COE operates as a completely independent entity under the AVMA umbrella. So that's what binds us together. Beginning in the early 2000s, the COE began offering accreditation to schools and colleges outside the United States and Canada. And since that time, 13 schools have made that very high bar of a very rigorous accreditation process. So all of those schools are full member institutions, and they have greatly expanded our reach, our global reach, and our international impact. But more important, as you well know, Phil, as a past president of the association, it has greatly expanded the diversity of our thinking as we approach issues in academic veterinary medicine, to have the voices of academic leaders from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, the Caribbean, Mexico, and most recently, Seoul National University in South Korea. We find we have much more in common than we do in difference, and having those perspectives has greatly enriched our activities.
It's the differences that actually provide areas of potential progress and reconsideration of our perspectives. I'm sorry, Peter, I think I stepped over you. I didn't mean to.
Well, I was going to go in a completely different direction, so you can finish your thoughts, and then I'll go in a completely different direction.
No, go ahead. I finished my thought.
I like to look backwards before we move forwards. So I would love to dive deeper into your background, because I didn't know any of this. I didn't know you were an MPH. I didn't know you were a Jewish doctor, a JD. I especially want to learn more about Oscar the Wonder Cat. But did you grow up on a farm?
I did not. Interesting thing, right? So, but I became interested in agriculture, just generally, livestock agriculture, having spent many summers in rural parts of Ohio based on family friends. And I got interested in milking cows and the whole production agriculture thing. But I was also interested in science and medicine. And I thought, wow, what could I possibly do to combine those interests? Biology, science, medicine, agriculture. Well, it turns out veterinary medicine is a pretty good fit for all of those things. And that's what drove my decision to go to vet school.
So, obviously you're an underachiever in all of the degrees that you have. The thermometer doesn't have nearly as many degrees as you have. But when you were at the Ohio State University, and I have a hard time saying that because I went to the University of Illinois, and when you were sitting in those classrooms in Columbus, Ohio, did you have any inclination, any indication that you might actually end up involved with academia and academics and everything like that?
Never in a million years, Peter. And that's it's a really interesting thing and something that I try and tell young people when I meet with them today, whether they're pre-veterinary students, currently enrolled students, or veterinarians just starting on their careers. There is no possible way that anybody, let alone me, could have predicted a career with this many twists and turns. I fully intended to live out my life as a rural community service veterinarian in Northeast Ohio, buying into the practice and, staying there in the community. And instead I, traveled around the world. And as you said, I've gotten involved in academic veterinary medicine. Not so secret, big reveal. I myself have never served on a faculty of any college or school anywhere. I've never been employed by a university. And I find myself in this position working in academic veterinary medicine. It's a treat.
I do want to thank you for your service to the universities, but I really want to thank you more for your service within the military. Again, that was just another twist and a turn that you took, but that is another opportunity for those who are interested in veterinary medicine, because I think sometimes we get so focused on companion animal because fully 2/3 of our students are companion animal or so, that we don't realize that the military, public health, and even the law degree are all things that with a veterinary degree add huge value to the impact that you can have in the One Health world in which we live.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter, and I appreciate your comments. I think for me, what drew me to the military was sort of an inherent obligation to public service. And I did feel that as a veterinarian, I was providing a public service, even though it was in the private fee-for-service sector. The public service was ensuring a safe food supply and ensuring animal disease control programs like tuberculosis and brucellosis control programs. We were doing the regulatory piece. What surprised me about the military that I wasn't expecting was they do an exceptionally good job of leadership development, and I thrived in that environment. The other thing that was particularly good across all branches of the military is a focus on mission. And what I learned there as an administrator of now a large program with a global reach is that it's that relentless focus on mission that allows you to get the job done. So many times, all leaders are distracted all the time by all sorts of minutia. And yes, you have to handle some of it. Some of it you have to delegate. But the point is, always asking yourself, how does this help us accomplish our mission? We all work in teams, we all work in groups. And if you keep the group focused on mission, you find you can get a lot done. And that was a really important part of my military background that I bring to my work here every day.
So to use a very bad metaphor or analogy, you're essentially the general at AAVMC, and you have all of these lieutenants who think of themselves as deans, that you are in charge of continuing to keep them focused on their mission. Would that be a good summary of what your current role is?
I'm not sure I would put it that way, but here's what I would say. There's some real commonalities in academic leadership and military leadership. And there's some great misconceptions about military leadership. Most people wouldn't think that there's a connection there. And here's the misconception. A lot of people think military leadership is about a lieutenant ordering a platoon to take that hill, right? That's what we see in the movies. And, they say, yes, sir. And up they go into, they risk their lives into machine gun fire and they execute the mission. The fact is that, yes, that does occur in the moment, in the heat of battle, but it's built on a system of leadership development and trust that was built between those people who are being ordered and those who are issuing orders. And that relationship of trust is built on leadership by persuasion. And that's what I have found that is common in academic leadership. And I don't need to be telling Dr. Nelson any of this. The job of a dean is not to tell the faculty what to do. I think, again, that's a common misconception taken from the corporate sector. Well, you're the CEO of the college, just tell them what to do and they got to do it, don't they? No. Faculty are independent contractors. And the way that you mobilize a team like that with a lot of different agendas, a lot of different priorities, is, again, to plant a clear vision and focus on a mission to achieving it. That's how you build teams in academic veterinary medicine. And it's the same thing in military leadership. So there's, like I said, more in common than in difference with those styles.
I got two questions. One's a fun one, and the other one is a more thoughtful one. Ever been in a plane like Top Gun with all those fast planes? Did you ever get on one of those and go out there, Mach 1, 2, 3, whatever it is?
Was this a serious question or
no,
Sorry.
That's the fun question.
It's hard to tell sometimes from Peter.
Yeah.
Okay. The short answer is no, but the answer that I want to give is a little bit more expanded. So, number one, I had a classmate, actually, he was 1 year behind me at Ohio State, a veterinarian who went into the Ohio National Guard, and he became a pilot, a fighter pilot. And there was a time that he got on a mission to fly his jet from Ohio to where I was stationed. At that time, it was in Missouri. And so I got a chance to sit in the cockpit. I didn't go up and fly. And the day he left, he told me, he said, drive down that road at the end of the runway and I'll light you up. And sure enough, he took off and he lit the afterburners right on top of me. And honest to God, I mean, it was, I thought that the whole world was going to explode. So that was a blast. The next best experience I had is when I was deployed to Saudi Arabia during the first Gulf War, the aftermath of that. And I had the opportunity to go on a refueling mission on a tanker, KC-135. So what we did is we took off and flew in this box pattern around the flight line. And so as these fighter jets took off, of course, they expend a lot of fuel to get up to altitude and they can't carry much. So they have to get refueled immediately soon after takeoff. They go out and fly their mission. Then they come back and get enough fuel so that they can land. So I got to sit in the boomer spot. I didn't operate the boom, but I got to sit right over the boomer's shoulder and watch that long, huge nozzle go down there and fill up those fighter jets. And, they come up in pairs like little mosquitoes, and they get one hooks up and then it flies off and then the other one comes up and then they both take off. And every single one of them asked, can you give me a little extra top off? Because they wanted to, do some fancy spirals and stuff. And but it was a blast to just sit there and watch that. So that's the closest I've come.
I guess the afterburners are what happened to your hair, right?
That was it. It's never been the same.
So the serious question is, you've got all of this diverse background, none of which you anticipated when you entered the Ohio State University. And you are envisioned in many ways as a thought leader and a disruptor from the AAVMC seat. Is there any of those, or is it really an accumulation of all of those that have that have motivated you to not necessarily accept the status quo, but to seek and encourage change?
That wasn't quite the question I was hoping for, but I'll try and get around to it. So, I've been really, really fortunate throughout my career. First of all, to have all of these different opportunities, but secondly, to be in a position to take advantage of them. Not everybody can do that, and I recognize that. I've changed careers several times. I've been able to move. I don't have any children, so I didn't have to worry about, staying in school or things like that. I was able to take advantage of these types of opportunities. The next thing I would say is, because a lot of people ask this, well, so you're not a veterinarian anymore. And I said, no, I'm still a veterinarian. I will always be a veterinarian. I just don't happen to use my veterinary skills the way that I did when I was in private practice. I use them in a different way, but I still approach problems, an idea of diagnosis, treatment, prevention. I still approach issues the same way that I approached, emergency case management. A quick assessment, and you take care of the top priorities: airway, breathing, circulation. You move through things that, it's a method of problem solving. Similarly, I happen to be a lawyer that has never practiced law and never had any intention of practicing law. But I use the skills that I was taught in law school about analysis and reasoning and precision in language, although I don't always achieve it every day, but those are the skills that I use every day. So that very and distorted and twisted background brings me to this place. And so is it that drives me to foster change? I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that I have any particular unique vision for the future of veterinary medicine or the future of academic veterinary medicine. What I have is the privilege of working with academic leaders who have a lot of good ideas, and I see my role as facilitating those good ideas. And when I hear somebody over here with this idea saying, I kind of wish I could do this, but I can't seem to get any support, I don't feel like we're ready for it. I said, well, let me try and connect you with a couple of people over here who I've heard they're thinking the same thing, and maybe we can get something together. So again, I don't see myself as the idea person or the change agent. I see myself as the facilitator that brings together those people. As I said, I don't know anything about teaching or assessment or academic administration. I've never done that, but I know people who have, and I help them do their jobs better.
So those are the hard questions. I'm done. I'm going to let Phil to ask you the easy ones.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Scotch or bourbon? Oh, sorry.
I appreciate that. Look, Andy, first of all, I want to say I beg to differ about your denial of your self-characterization as a change agent. There are many forms of change agents, and expertise is not necessarily the only requirement. Sometimes, as you know from your military training, if you need an artilleryman who has a particular expertise in delivering to a particular target, somebody has to pick the target. And it's not necessarily the artilleryman that does that. There's somebody else that's scoping a territory and deciding which target to hit. And whenever we induce change in society or in a profession, that change is a team effort, is the result of a team effort. And usually getting people to work together is the key to making that change. And so I don't want, coming from a problem-based curriculum ideology, I don't want to diminish the role of a facilitator as opposed to the effector or in getting change done. All of us are responsible for that. It's those that keep our heads in the sand that aren't change agents, in my opinion. So a lot of our focus has been on societal issues, social justice issues, and how they interplay with the veterinary profession. And some of our discussions may be solely focused on social justice issues because they're so complex. And then some of them address social justice or societal issues as they interact and interplay with the profession. I'm going to ask you rather complex question, and there is no right answer here, but it will probably kick off the rambling part of our discussion, which I think Peter and I tend to find so enjoyable. And that is, what do you see as the top 3 to 5 challenges of the profession that we need to address in the next 3 to 5 years?
Okay, access to care, working better with technicians, team-based care. Third, I would say, is technology, the role of understanding and incorporating the role of technology into, it's kind of related to access to care. And well-being for the profession at all levels. Those are the top issues. But I gotta say, the number one issue that transcends all of those and any other issue that any other guest has ever said on this program is diversity. And let me explain what I mean by that. We know that we lack diversity in our profession. We are making progress, but it is slow. We have been described by many as the least diverse profession and certainly the least diverse health profession. Again, we are making progress by removing barriers to people from diverse backgrounds to enter our programs, but there is still a great deal of work to do before we approach anything close to parity with the society that we serve. And so why is it so important? Well, the answer goes like this. There is ample evidence that more diverse teams make better decisions at all levels, whether it's a 3-person team or a 30-person team or a 300-person team at a company or whatever. There's ample evidence. And the reason that diversity counts is people with different backgrounds, different lived experiences, have different thought processes, different ways of interacting with the world. And those different lived experiences are based on their identity. So I don't need to tell you, Phil, that the lived experience of a Black man is different from the lived experience of a white man, no matter what other factor is at play. The lived experience of a white woman is different from the lived experience of a white man. And having those different frameworks, those different references, mental references, helps a team come up with more solutions. They see, if you present them with a problem, they'll come up with more solutions. And if it's true, and again, the evidence is clear that more diverse teams make better progress and come up with more solutions to problems, then it stands to reason that a more diverse profession can adapt to the unknown future and take advantage of upcoming opportunities that none of us can predict, right? Today's students are going to be practicing for the next 40 or 50 years. Nobody can predict what the challenges and opportunities are that they're going to see. Our only hedge against, the demise of this profession is to ensure that we have ample diversity so that we've got people who see different potential solutions to these challenges or opportunities and take advantage of them. If we all come from the same background, we're all going to come up with the same solutions. And if it's not the right one, we're going to go extinct.
High five on that. Can we just can that and share it? I mean, that's just so spot on. I completely concur with that statement. And I do think that the diversity will actively help us address some of the other issues that you brought forth, and creating a more heterogeneous profession will give us different ways to think of solving some of the problems that we have. I mean, if we continue to do it the same way, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Well, we do need to think differently, and that means bringing new mindsets, new ideas, new backgrounds, and whether it's race, religion, color, gender, whatever the case may be, all of those need to be put into the goulash to add flavor to what we're trying to do to institute change going forward and get the veterinary profession out of its rut.
What I'd add to it, Peter, is you're right. It's all of those dimensions. It's not just race or ethnicity or gender. It's all of those and more. Sexual orientation, sexual identity, socioeconomic status, geographic background, all of these things, and even more, the visible ones as well as the invisible characteristics that make us who we are, because each one of those plays into the way that each one of us interacts with the world. The other thing I would say is diversity is only the starting point. We will not achieve the benefits of diversity unless we have an inclusive environment where those different voices are not only heard, but encouraged and listened to and embraced. So but you got to start with the diversity first, and then you add the inclusion and belonging and those elements as well, because that's where we get the real benefit.
I want to take this opportunity to remind all of us that race is a social construct, a mythical social construct, and I could care less if you include it or not, because humanity is humanity. If you use all the other characteristics of diversity, you will include every race naturally. And part of our problem in achieving progress in diversity is our focus on race. Of course, some of that is naturally so because we have structural changes we have to make in our politics and our laws to correct the barriers to diversity. But I also want to add that I love your comment, Andy, about the different perspectives, each difference that we care about in our maturation affords us as a team. But it's not simply about the number of solutions that diversity might provide in a diverse group. Surely, I think it should be innately intuitive to just about everybody that the more perspectives you can include into a group, the more likely you are to come up with more potential solutions. But it is the impact of those solutions on the very demographics and characteristics of the population you're trying to resolve a problem for that makes that diversity important. If we stop at the simple number, then we don't necessarily show the real power of that increased basket of solutions, if you will. And I think that's an important point to push forward.
That goes to that access of care thing that's the first one that came to my mind when you were talking about that, Phil, is how important that is. And we look at the number of communities that are not being served by the veterinary medical profession today. And, that means we are failing at our end of the social contract. Society gives our profession a great deal of latitude and self-regulation, but our end of the bargain is we got to meet societal needs, and we are at the current time not doing that. So you're right.
I agree, but I also say that access to care, everything that you named, and I'm glad you put diversity as number one, but because everything that you named is related to our problems in diversity, but indirectly, access to care is a two-sided coin. Access to care is dependent on the client's ability to pay, as well as the healthcare deliverer's ability to deliver that healthcare to those who aren't able to pay. And those who can't pay largely because of inequitable access to quality education in this society. And so we have to look at both sides of the coin in terms of correcting that. I do not accept total responsibility as a veterinarian for access to care. I have to understand the social determinants that also lead to the problems of access to care and address those issues as well. That's the total solution. In the meantime, we may have to make superhuman efforts to overcome those barriers that people will not be able to overcome through education because they have been denied for so long.
Access to care also includes physical access to veterinarians in underserved communities where they may not be a veterinary practice, or maldistribution of veterinarians to the urban areas when the more rural areas need them as well. So you've got financial constraints as well as physical constraints amongst others.
And why do you think there isn't a veterinarian in a veterinary desert?
Is that a question directed to me?
Either one of you. Yes, I'm mixing it up now.
I'll answer that from my opinion, because I don't come from it as maybe the same way. Why do I not think that there are veterinarians in veterinary deserts? Because the community hasn't seen a veterinarian as a job opportunity because they don't have access to veterinarians of the same color. They don't see people like themselves, and there are not a number of applicants from those communities to veterinary school so that they can be encouraged to return to their homes. That would be my opinion.
Andy?
Why don't we see veterinarians in veterinary deserts? Because it's hard to make a living there.
Right, exactly. And why is it hard to make a living there? Because that's where we concentrate those people who don't have access to quality education. And those who escape and want to come back find it difficult to come back to those communities and make a living. I mean, and so that's why I say we can't just focus on healthcare delivery to address this issue of access to care. We have to understand there are deeper issues or broader problems, societal problems that we have to at least take a stand on.
So one way I've said that, Phil, is, and it's kind of getting at the same thing, is this profession does a remarkably good job, just outstanding job of providing exceptionally high-level care to high-income people. We do a great job, right? We've got board-certified specialists who can do amazing work, and as long as they got clients who can afford that to pay, it's good. What we are not getting to is lower levels of income and sometimes even basic preventive care, even, primary preventive care. So one answer to it, what you're saying is, if more people were in middle class or upper middle class incomes, then we would be reaching more people. But it's because they're not, they're for various reasons stuck in a lower income bracket. They still love their pets, but they don't have the ability to pay. And if we could get them, up the economic ladder, then all of society would benefit. Yes.
Yeah. Even access to care is a more complicated concept than we think of when we say it.
So speaking from a business standpoint, because that's how I like to speak, we can create new business models that allow sufficient income for a veterinarian in a veterinary desert. We also have to start to accept spectrum of care as part of that discussion. And we may not be able to build a veterinary practice that has all of the bells and whistles, but if we built a veterinary practice that provided affordable well care and provided a community feel for people, there's enough margin and profit in that practice to make affordable pricing and affordable access. It happens all the time. It's how do we find those models, replicate them, and move them into underserved areas and show that this is a very acceptable, doable model.
Hear, hear.
Here's another one that I just heard of recently, and I don't want to divulge any, either trade secrets or business practices, but it certainly caught my attention. So consider the shelter community. That's where I believe I've got this right, that about 40% of adoptions occur through shelters. The next highest number is private sales, free puppies. And then the least number is through commercial breeders. But so we got this shelter community place, right? And, shelters are, they're looking for ways to balance their books as they provide more and more care. On the other hand, we know that there are parts of this industry that are doing financially very well. Some of the animal health companies, pharmaceutical companies, the nutrition companies, and even some of the large consolidators on the service side of things. And congratulations, they're doing well, and that means we've got a strong industry. But how do we get some of that revenue or profit to help support the other end of this? Well, these things, they got to be mutually beneficial, especially for a publicly held corporation. It is not their mission to give away money, right? So they've got to, but they have corporate social responsibility platforms, and they do some of that. But what about the idea of putting a new pet parent that's just adopted at the shelter before they leave with that new animal to get them a consultation with a veterinarian, or perhaps even better and more appropriate, a veterinary technician who can instead of just shoving a bunch of literature at them and say, read this when you get home and go to a veterinarian, they can actually spend some time with them going over the idea of, proper nutrition, well care, prevention, heartworm, all of those things, all of that sponsored by the producers, the manufacturers of those products, who pay a premium to be in the room at the shelter and be represented in that room as they develop a lifelong relationship with that pet partner. Those types of things can come in, and then that extra revenue beyond just the free samples and a little bit of advertising, maybe a plus up, might go to offset some of the access to care for the one category is the working poor, somebody who earns enough money that they might not benefit from some philanthropic benefits, but they don't earn quite enough to, pay the full cost. So those are some models that I think bear, how do we make those connections? That's the key there.
And eventually, I think the pet health insurance industry needs to develop some more affordable policies, not on the well care side. I think we can develop business models that can make well care profitable and affordable. But for those people in underserved communities who can afford maybe $20 a month for pet insurance for the unexpected issues that occur, the current policies still cater to middle class, upper middle class.
And as you know, the progress of diversity has been, in the veterinary profession, has been described anywhere from abysmal to moderate. I don't think I've ever heard glowing terms about our progress in this area. In the 1960s, there was less than 0.2% diversity, and then by the year 2000, we increased that to 2%. Diversity. Depending on whether or not you're an epidemiologist or an economist, you might think that's a pretty good jump over 3 decades. Depending of whether or not you were in those marginalized groups or not, you might not be so satisfied with that type of growth. And yet, I must say that my involvement with AAVMC for nearly 40 years has shown that there is definitely a change in culture toward diversity among academic leaders. Having said that, I am somewhat despondent by the recent challenges that I've seen that I believe may have an impact, serious impact, on the general acceptance of diversity and the moves and the progress we have made. I'd like to know what you see as the greatest challenges toward our present progress and or future progress. And I'm trying not to direct your answer at all. So please forgive me for being as vague as I've been.
No, I appreciate that, Phil. And you're right. We have made progress. There is still much progress to be made. So our latest data shows that our current enrollment is about 24 to 25% underrepresented minorities. And when we look at a society at large in the United States, it's approaching 50%. And in some states, including California, I believe it's over 50% non-white, then you can see we've still got a lot of work to do. We're only about halfway there. The challenge we have is, and the way we got there was by removing barriers. Those candidates were oftentimes always in the applicant pool. They just didn't get a chance to go through the admissions process. By removing barriers, all of a sudden, our schools are admitting more and more diverse applicants. But we will very quickly run out of all the diversity that is in our current applicant pool, and it still won't be enough. That will only get us to about 30% underrepresented minorities. So if we're going to achieve a goal of coming anywhere close to parity with the society that we serve, we have to encourage more young people who are attending post-secondary education to consider careers in veterinary medicine. And that's where one big challenge lies. What are the obstacles to us achieving that goal? Well, this is the hell of it. I look at my own journey on this, and I got to admit, I was one of those when I went to high school and I learned about civil rights movement, which was not far removed from it when I was in high school in the 1970s. As a matter of fact, the struggle was still going on. But I left that with the impression that, oh, we got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Oh, we've got the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Problem solved, on we go, right? It's done. Not so. In my own journey coming from thinking that those problems were all solved and there was nothing to do, coming to the realization that there are systemic barriers, having opportunities, all of a sudden it's like, we've got a lot of work to do. So this is, my great frustration. Even though I'm late to the party, I'm an advocate, and I hope that came across strongly in this discussion. But now we are all being thwarted by, again, the anchors that are hell-bent on saying, knock it off. We got to stop talking about diversity. We got to stop talking about race. And as you said, Phil, that's only one dimension of diversity. But I am very concerned about the backlash we're seeing. We're likely to see the United States Supreme Court come down with a ruling that will almost certainly, based on all the prognostications, say that universities may not consider race in any way in the application process. We won't know that until June, but most observers believe that will be the case. And even more troubling, we're seeing in over a dozen states legislation either being proposed or passed that restricts the mere discussion of diversity and equity in public institutions. What kind of society would limit that type of discussion? It's very frightening to me.
An authoritarian society.
What's that?
An authoritarian society.
Yes. What kind of a society bans books? Like
a tyrannical society.
That's it. And that is happening in our society. The world's longest living democracy is being besieged by elements of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And that is frightening if you stand back and take a look at it, but it's just damn discouraging when you look at it as implicating our efforts to try to increase diversity in our programs.
I think your response was right on target. I think we have underestimated the scope of the threat. I know that we have couched this threat in the diversity movement, in the DEI movement, but I find it very disappointing that we can have a discussion about the Second Amendment and not suddenly raise our hackles. I don't understand why the same people who are so adamant about protecting the Second Amendment are not as adamant about protecting the First. It bothers me that the same groups that are protecting the Second Amendment seem to be attacking the First. And aberration of the First Amendment is what was used to provide an innocent story of the origin of the United States and tended to limit the education of the true history of the United States in certain areas to minimize the mistakes that were made. And that prevents us from making the mistake all over again. And that is my fear. My first fear is that tyrannical, totalitarian, authoritarian movement only helps those in power. It does not allow for the American dream. It only allows for selected patriotism to be rewarded.
It was interesting, Andy, for me to listen to your discussion of the civil rights movements, because you and I and Phil are all relatively close in age. Phil's the oldest. What started a lot of our conversations going back to the very beginning was my comment that I thought we got over this. And Phil has to keep reminding me that, yeah, things are better. They're just far from where they need to be. And so from our standpoint, looking in as an outsider, and I recognize my white privilege, I wear it as a badge of Phil. But from Phil's standpoint, I have learned so much in having these conversations about the progress that has been made. And in Phil's discussion and a little bit of your discussion about the changing environment that we're in, it really does continue to identify the gaps and the rift and the chasm, the Grand Canyon that now currently exists between polarized opposites. We just are so far apart in discussions, even within the profession, on all of the issues that you brought forth as of concern. We can't even get people in the room together willing to have a conversation about DEI. We have people pushing back that it's a problem looking for a place for a solution. We have people who say that there isn't an access to care and pets should be a right and that only people who can meet that right should have pets. All of these different things within the profession mimic what we're seeing in the global world. And I think that it's scary to recognize that we as a very, very, very minuscule profession can't come together and try to find common threads to address these issues instead of fighting them when we really need to be coming together.
I agree with you, although I think there's another way to look at this too, and that is because we don't have our profession couldn't field the largest football stadium in the country. We have the opportunity to overcome those polarized positions and get people and get a significant number of people in the same room. The problem is, in my opinion, is that many of our thought leaders are thinking at the national level, but the implementation occurs at the local level. I thought your statement, Andy, about having a diverse post-secondary student population was very on target, but I wouldn't expect anything else from you. That was an analysis of the problem, right? But there's a further analysis, and that is how well are we preparing that diverse population in our K through 12 education, and how are we going to address it? And this is where our profession can be powerful if they understand their role in their locales in fighting for equitable access to quality education. That means that whether we like it or not, we need to be a part of the discussions of charter schools and public schools and not as a veterinary profession, as American citizens care about every individual having the opportunity to make their choice. And the profession then gets a chance at a bite at the apple, knowing that they're qualified applicants in that pool. And I think that's all we're asking. So as individuals, we have to decide when we're American citizens and what those duties are, and when we are veterinarians and what those obligations are and how they intersect. And I know the three of us don't have a problem with intersectionality, but I do remember in my early career, I was told whenever I went to a convention and I spoke about diversity or something, the response was, this is a veterinary conference. We don't talk about that here.
And I was one of those, Phil.
I know.
And I may have told you this. It's, when some of the affinity groups in veterinary medicine started up, I get the species groups, because I was a member of the bovine practitioners. That made sense to me. But when the LGVMA, now known as Pride VMC community, when they started, it's like, we're all just veterinarians. Why do they need a separate group? And then another group and another group. Why do they need a separate group? We're all veterinarians. Why? We're here to talk about breakthroughs in treatment and disease control and, new techniques. That's why we come to veterinary meetings. We don't talk about these broad societal issues. And then again, this is part of my own journey, as I expect it is for most of us from a background that's similar to mine. It's like, aha, now I see that it's a matter of, first of all, awareness that there are issues, some problems, some achievements, and some work yet to be done. And It has to do with how I work within my team in my workplace, whatever type of workplace that is, and in the customers, clients, or people that I serve, no matter whether they are, again, paying customers or the public or whatever. Understanding these elements and does a great deal to providing better service. So, I mean, there's a lot of connections here, but yeah, I'm one of those who said, no, we don't need to talk about that here. Now I'm on the other side of it saying it's an essential component of all of our meetings.
I had a realization the other day. I was teaching a class in vet issues with Dr. Weinstein, and we were going over regulations of the veterinary profession. And a statement was made that made a lot of sense, and I took it and expanded on it, as I usually do. But the statement was that every regulation in the Veterinary Practice Act of California was stimulated by somebody who did something wrong, by somebody who actually challenged the safety of a pet or did not serve a consumer well. But every regulation was stimulated by an action. And when I thought about that, I thought, we didn't have speeding laws until we lost enough people from speeding, which is a regulation, right? You don't have affinity groups until you have enough people suffering injustice, until you have enough people in that group suffering from an injustice, and then they bond together to fight those injustices. The fact that you have those groups mean that there is an organized culture that results in an injustice. It is tangible evidence of that injustice, or of those actions that cause them to bond together.
Very interesting, Phil. And here's two examples that come to mind on that. We are all old enough to remember when there was an AAVMA auxiliary.
Yes.
It was made up of the wives, not spouses, but the wives of veterinarians. It no longer exists. Now, some of what they were doing transferred to the foundation. The AVMF collects money and supports charitable causes. So the work continues, but the auxiliary did more than that, but that was one of their functions. But there was no need for a wives group. The next one that I come to think of was the Women's Veterinary Medical Association, which no longer exists. However, there is a women's veterinary leadership development thing, because we got plenty of women. They are no longer a minority that is oppressed or marginalized or feeling on the outs. We got plenty of women, but they are still either being denied or not in leadership positions at a level where they should be commensurate with their representation in the profession. So there's still a need to develop leadership, to do leadership development for women. So that group exists because there's a need for it. But you're right. If there were no need, there wouldn't be one. There never was a need for a white male veterinary club. Well, it was the veterinary club.
Yes, there was one, but it was AVMA.
Well, and now we're getting closer to having a need for having a need for a men's veterinary club, because now we are the minority.
But only if the men are being discriminated against.
Well, I know, I'm just being sarcastic, Phil.
But it's a really important point, and I don't want to let it go, because this actually came up in the House of Delegates. And if we don't combat that perception with some radical truth and some radical candor, then what we will stoke is this feeling of this white male inferiority complex, or whatever it is that's going around. And here is the issue, because it is true that men are underrepresented. Men of all races and colors and types are underrepresented in our profession. The reasons are very, very different. To my knowledge, men have never been discriminated against on the basis of sex in this profession or in the history of the world in any aspect of it, to my knowledge. Men have never been discriminated against on the basis of sex. So if we want to, it is an observation that we have only about 20% men in our enrollment today, so that will be the future of our profession. it's not as if we got to stop discriminating against them like we did have to stop discriminating against women. All of our schools used to actively discriminate against women until it was made to be illegal. And some of them did it even after that for a while until they got their hands smacked. So our goal, our approach to getting men back in the profession is a different one. It's more of persuasion and encouragement.
And that's a very important difference, but it goes back to the original statement that it is the injustice or somebody did something wrong that created the group. And being a minority or being outnumbered is not the problem. That is not a cause for forming a group or forming a club. It is being denied equitable opportunities that
it's not being heard.
That too, either way. I don't,
What
whatever it takes for you to understand that it is more than numbers.
Right.
This is the opposite side of people who think that DEI is just about making sure that, as one of our fellow colleagues said in a letter to us, that all we're trying to do is make sure that we have a certain number of minorities in every group or every class or whatever we're talking about. That is not what we're trying to achieve. That's not what we should be trying to achieve. And if the number situation shifts without a change in policies, that's not a problem.
You mean we created a humane veterinary association, which kind of indicated that the AVMA was not humane? I want to, with great pain, tell Phil that I fully agree that we need to do this from a grassroots standpoint. I don't think this is top-down change. This is grassroots change. And it's the local organized veterinary medicine, regional veterinary medicine, to a degree, some of the state associations. But the changes that are necessary are generational changes. We are not going to increase the pool of high school applicants today. We have to go back to the kindergartens, K through 6, and start to make the changes that will impact the next generation. And that goes as well for male applicants. This is not going to happen overnight, but it's going to take an effort to give them a reason to want to become involved, to want to become invested. And it's going to be one-on-one conversations. It's going to be me and you and them and me, whomever they may be, listening as to the opportunities that are there, and then probably even mentoring and coaching at that level to start to fill the pipeline with what we're going to need for 10, 15, 20 years down the road. This is not top down. This is really going down to the molecular level and making the molecules that we need to give us the profession that we want to see down the road.
Yeah, I would agree, Peter. And it's, this is it's actually probably closer to a 30 or 40-year timeline before we may see significant changes. And the challenge with that is it's a long-term strategy. And as human beings, most of us don't have quite that long of an attention span or that level of commitment that we can carry on for that many years. It's like the best time to plant a tree was about 50 years ago. The next best time is today. So there's that thought too. But the other thing I would add to it is it's like most human interaction, these types of things, it's relationship-based, and it's relationships based on trust. And that trust comes from, not just a one-off at a Boys and Girls Club or a career day at an elementary school. It's year after year being there, maybe participating in a 4-H club. And I know that veterinarians are busy. We're all busy. But what if there were a late Saturday afternoon, you invite a club to tour the clinic? I don't know, a couple of times a year, you go to a class and you do a career day, a career fair thing. Those are maybe small things. There are probably much better things that I wouldn't possibly know about because I'm not a primary school educator, but there are people who do know, right? This is what they're experts in. And we need to bring them into the equation and say, what types of tools can we provide teachers? How can local veterinarians and veterinary associations, this is the power of associations, because they can provide a pool of people. So it's not just, Dr. Jones go on his own or her own all the time. What can we do? What are the effective ways that we can engage young learners and make this something that they look forward to and want to do? A great example some of you may know about is Sandy San Miguel's program, Veta Humans at Purdue, which is now being replicated at nearly all of the US schools. And what it does is it takes enrolled veterinary students, first and second year students, and they get connected with elementary schools in underserved areas. And they have a number of tools that allow these young children to take on an avatar, an alternate identity as a superhero. And to me, it was kind of like, oh, cool, comic book stuff. Of course, kids love that. But what I learned is there is an educational, psychological development aspect to this. Young children at that stage of development, and it's a targeted area, they need to have an alter ego. Some of them need to have several others. It's how they develop a sense of self, is looking at themselves as if they were a different person or transforming themselves into something, even if it's imaginary, that helps them define themselves. And it's a key stage of brain development. All of a sudden I just thought it was cool because they get to put on a cape and pretend to rescue an animal, but it's much deeper than that.
There's another good example too. In your own organization, when I was working with the Multicultural Affairs Committee before it became the Diversity Committee, at your annual meeting, you always have a recruitment event for high school students. And it attracts students who are interested in veterinary medicine, thinking about applying to veterinary medicine. We're not talking about K through 12 now. Well, we are because usually these are either 11th and 12th graders,
yep,
or first and second year college students who get a chance to come to see every college in one space. And when we first started it, I bet you we had maybe 30 students. And now hundreds of students appear. And you get students there from as far away as Pennsylvania. And I think one year I met a student from Vermont who would never come out to Western to look at Western, but they got to talk to the dean. I think that is just as important. But to Peter's point, I totally agree with what both of you said. I just think that I'm not worried about the numbers in the future. That, as you said, there are a number of reasons why there's been a gender shift. One of the major reasons is because we actively blocked women from applying. And at the same time, when we removed those barriers and made application an open process, that's when the computer industry also developed. Because of inequity of education as mathematics and science and computer science, we set ourselves up. Again, it's about equity in access to education. And even now, our women leaders in veterinary medicine feel that they aren't getting the same opportunities in leadership training in veterinary medicine as males are. Now, I want to point out that we are a non-diverse panel here. There are no women here to validate anything we're saying or to offer a different perspective. And I just feel it's important that I bring that up.
Well, I want to try to wrap up this section of our conversation so we can move to some other of the topics that we've got on board. And
does that mean you're going to get the last word?
I'm going to get the last word for this section, yes. And basically say that everybody who's listening, plant a tree. Because if you want a forest, you got to plant the first tree. So whether it's to go to if you've got kids, you've gotten in. If you don't have kids, find somebody who does and get in. Talk to the elementary schools, talk to the high schools, go to the career fairs, talk to the scouts, make sure you help those scouts get a badge that has something to do with animals, 4-H, FFA, plant a tree. And then the next generation will have a forest. And that's what we're talking about. Don't forget, with Phil and I, there's a lot of fertilizer, and you need some of that just as well. Before we wrap up the DEI discussion, I have to say something. Phil, remember the names of my two cats when I was growing up?
Blackie and Whitey?
Yeah, well, Andy, your cat looks just like my cat Whitey. I'd love to put a picture up of Whitey right now, but just want to let you know that you brought back memories of my childhood and a podcast that I did with Phil way at the beginning, where I had to apologize for the names of my cats. That being said, I want to kind of thank Nationwide for supporting this portion of this discussion. Thank Dr. Maccabe and Dr. Nelson, and take a breather for just a minute, and then we'll start on with the next section of our discussion.